Morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear us. So good morning. Welcome to day 2 of our 10th annual conference around Israel Dealmakers. So it's great to be here. It's my pleasure to introduce Hans. Hans is, hopefully many of you know him, he's pretty darn good at investing. He's got, I'll give you some names. So he's on the board of Wish, Poshmark, Grub Market, OfferUp. He's invested in Musical.ly, Slack, Limebike, Peloton, Misfit, Airbnb, Flipboard, DraftKings, Xiaomi, some good names. So either you're really lucky or you actually know what you're doing. So we're just going to have a kind of a casual conversation here and get to know you a little bit and maybe get some words of wisdom for the crowd and some of the entrepreneurs and other investors. So maybe just to kick it off, would love to get kind of your first kind of foray into the tech investment world. Kind of what attracted you? How did you get into it way back when?
Sure. I think growing up in Taiwan and in LA, I was deciding between 2 schools for college. One was Stanford, the other was MIT. And I think everyone I know in Taiwan would want me to go to MIT. But for some reason, the sunshine and the campus feel of Stanford was slightly more attractive. So I think I become a worse student at Stanford, becoming more distracted, but was closer to Silicon Valley as a result. So since then, having gone through career investment banking, focused on tech first in New York and then in Asia, and then did 2 startups during the first wave of internet, gave me the preparation to take advantage of the second wave with the rise of internet in China. Very cool.
And then also kind of get maybe in deeper, what's one thing that a lot of the crowd may not know about you?
Now I've lived in 10 cities, Taipei, Singapore, Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai in Asia, and then New York, Boston, LA, San Francisco, and Menlo Park. Having been to and worked in 10 cities, I don't think I'm smarter than most people in this room. But having the data points from 10 cities and 10 regions and being a student in history to see how civilization, countries, nations, empires rise and fall, gave me a better chance of investing and picking companies who ends up being category winners in both US and China.
Very cool. So you've made a lot of investments. You've had some great successes. I'm sure you've had some failures. Is there any one deal that is your favorite kind of experience, whether it was positive or negative, and maybe like the greatest learning experience you had?
I can do one each.
Okay.
The most satisfying is probably Xiaomi, because I was able to invest from day one, and the valuation was $20 million. And then they're rumored to go IPO this year, somewhere between 50 to 100 billion in a span of 8 years. And it's decent, yes. And having worked with the founder for 3 years when he was an angel investor looking for his next thing, when other people wasn't sure if he still has it in him to do something. And then when he first did something, start with Xiaomi, I remember a lot of people told us that Nokia, Motorola, Ericsson have to fail for this company to have any chance at all. So that assessment was exactly right in 2010. And 2 years later, that's exactly what happened. Yep. And so to be able to see something and bet on something when everyone else tell you is wrong and see how that could grow and be different is extremely interesting.
Very cool.
On the flip side, I have invested in companies that try to take on the giants head on, especially in social networking. I remember investing in 3 companies, all tried to take on the social media gorilla of their time. And out of 3, 2 of them failed. The 3rd one was sold, which is going to be decent. I think actually could be great. But it's just very difficult to take on a hot market against the incumbent and still win. But it was still worth trying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, interesting. So would you say that you are sector-focused, theme-focused, or are you just looking for that management team that wows you?
I know that I'm not a good deductive thinker. I suck at messy type of analysis. I'm much better at inductive thinking, looking for 3, 4, 5 data points and somehow connect the dot to form a thesis. And from that thesis, ends up focusing on sectors. For example, 5 years ago, I made a determination back in 2012, 2013 that I think globalization of mobile internet is going to be huge, and that US and Chinese company will become more global and they will collide more, and in that process, there are going to be more M&A opportunities, consolidations. So that thesis led us to invest in Didi in China, which ends up buying Uber, led us to invest in Grab Taxi in China, and Didi invest in Grab, pulling SoftBank money, and who knows, maybe do a deal with Uber very soon. So what SoftBank has done in the last couple of years, we kind of thought that's possible 5 years earlier and start investing early stage to try to take advantage of that. Investing Wish was also similar. Seeing what Taobao and Tmall has done in China, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that those 14, 15, 16 million merchants on Taobao eventually want to sell beyond China. And therefore, someone's going to take advantage of that, and Wish was the best position to do so in 2013. So whereas more people in the Valley sees Wish back in 2013 as selling cheap stuff from China, what's so interesting about it? I don't use it. None of the people I know use it. This thing has no value. You have more data points than anyone else, you can start seeing what's potentially possible.
Very, very cool. So how do you define traction? I mean, because you get companies very early and mid, late. I mean, are there 3 or 4 questions you ask to deduce traction? Or are they the same? Are they different? I'm just curious your thought. You probably get 150 companies a day asking you to invest in them, right?
In the Valley, it's so data driven. It's almost sexy to say, I don't care what sector I'm investing in. I don't need to know the idea, just like data and help me make decisions. And I can do that systematically and will be able to get into better deals versus not over a longer period of time. I'm not a perfect subscriber of that philosophy. I do think that you have the view where the future ought to be and use the early signals to help you to validate if your thesis has a chance of making it. And if you have enough intelligent guesses, then you invest this way, you have just as good, if not better, chance of picking winners. That's how I approach. So because I have a thesis, it doesn't take a lot for me to see traction. When I first met Wish, it was fall 2013. And the first 5 questions I asked them is that, what sells well on your platform, branded or unbranded goods? Most people expect to hear branded goods or want to see that because that means that you have cracked the nut with all the brands. I don't. I think it's very difficult with brands. Big companies that have been around for a long time don't move very fast. So when they say unbranded goods, I liked it. Second thing is that who's buying it in the US? Is it New York, San Francisco, LA, or is it Heart of America? They showed me a heat map where the purchases are, and mostly in Heart of America. Most people will not like it because our pool could be low, and it's not a prime user, it's more value users. I loved it because I think that's an underserved market. The third question I asked was, what's the split between US sales versus international sales? You've been doing this for 6 months, what's the split? They said 60% US, 40% internationally. For most people, it's like, oh, are you having trouble selling in the US? For me, it's like, that's fantastic. You only take you 6 months, and you're only in San Francisco, and you can sell globally. I have not seen anything that can expand this quickly with so little localization on a global basis. So that's another plus for me. Fourth was, how many people do you have in China do the sourcing? Because I know you need to have a good merchant management system, and they have 0. For most people, it's like, oh, you haven't cracked China yet. For us, it's like, that's great. I can help you to build a team in China. So it doesn't matter what a signal is. It only matters the framework you use to analyze those signals.
Okay. And you haven't mentioned management team yet. And I always hear management team is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And you got to have maybe some anecdotes of you thought the management team was the right one and it ended up not being, or vice versa. You were skeptical and then you missed an investment and it turned out those guys were the absolute best.
I think both of us have been enough investments where we see a team that didn't know what they're doing ends up figuring things out and ends up building a huge company. Mm-hmm. You can think of Airbnb, Facebook, a number of examples in the Valley. And then you could also say that team was just super amazing. I have to invest in them. Somehow they just don't end up making it. I'm not... My point is that you can find success and failures with both approach. Yep. So it really comes down to, and this, as an early investor, you just don't know how fast can the team learn. So what I look for is clock speed. How fast does this team adjust and figure things out and not be afraid to try a lot of things, to use a lot of low-cost iterations to figure out if they are onto something interesting. So the chance of success is higher if somebody has high clock speed and has a team of people that come from different cultures and backgrounds, because then you have better chance to not have groupthink and miss something that's not obvious but ends up could be the difference maker. If I look at Wish, the two co-founders, one from Eastern Europe, the other one is from China, both met at University of Waterloo in Canada. One worked at Google and one worked at Yahoo afterwards, and they end up working together on Wish. So having perspective from outside of the US, as well as being trained in the US, helped them to see and be willing to try things that most people here just wouldn't.
Very interesting. This is the Israel Dealmaker Conference. You've done a lot of investing in Asia, in the US, right. Less in Israel.
Correct.
You're now interested and focused. Is there a different screen you do? Is there a different dynamic than your typical investing pattern, or
I think
to be determined?
We always want to do more in Israel. It's just our bandwidth is more limited, given US and China are huge already. What we would love to do is meet Israeli teams that are willing to come here and then figure out, given their superior technology, can we help with market entry in both US and China? Obviously, these are two of the biggest technology markets in the world.
Yep. What do you see in terms of strategy around combining China and Israel strategies going forward?
China is definitely in the manufacturing center of the world. It's increasingly become the biggest consumer for electronics and anything hardware related in the world. And as such, given the superior technology innovations that come out of the Israeli military and engineers and scientists in Israel, I think there's a chance to help companies from Israel to sell more and to manufacture more efficiently in China.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things that is interesting about the current state of the venture market is how long companies are waiting to IPO or even sell, and they're becoming multi-tens, $20 billion private companies. Never happened before in the history of the venture world. Yep. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Does it make it more challenging? What is your perspective on that?
It's definitely not as good a thing for public investors, because the chance of them the chance of them getting into the growth early is obviously denied. So on that aspect, it's not as good. Overall speaking, I think this trend is hard to stop. You see Vision Fund from SoftBank and Sequoia raising a $15 billion fund. All of us think about, if we want to stay in the game, either you go very early and one-person, two-person shop, do your thing, or you have to get much bigger. So the world is polarizing on both ends, on the venture side. And so for us, building a more global practice and be able to build a stronger team that can take on a bigger AUM is something that we need to think about. And that's just the reality of the situation today.
Yeah, very cool. Probably last question. Do you have a mentor?
Good question. I have several mentors in my life that I work with. I've won at Bessemer. I learned a lot from working at Bessemer before I went to China and really started my VC career. I had a mentor from Singapore Telecom, actually two mentors from Singapore Telecom, that taught me a lot about how a big corporation think about innovations and technology adoption. And thirdly, I think just working with smart entrepreneurs taught me a lot. So I have a few entrepreneurs, including the founders of Xiaomi and Wish and Slack and Airbnb. You learn a lot from working with them.
Very cool. We're out of time. It's a real pleasure talking to you.
Sure,
thank you.